Hello, lovely folks of YouTube. Ren here. So, it's kind of a gloomy February day outside. Been feeling kind of unmotivated in the dumps. I've made myself a little bit of tea to try and cheer myself up. I decided that today I would kind of go off of the gardening aspect a little bit and talk more about green witchcraft and what that practice means to me. So it's kind of somewhat tangentially inspired by a video that Thorn Mooney had put out where she was talking about fake witchcraft books and basically connecting to the authors and learning about their practice through the books that they wrote. And when you're reading these books by authors that don't actually exist, they're just kind of compilations of ghost-ridden stuff, then you're not really connecting to someone who's a practitioner. And that kind of tangentially led me to the idea to create this video because I think that that's really important. That's part of why I do this, is to help build that connection with other people and just share what I do. I know that what I do is not going to be what everybody else wants to do, but I hope that at least people will find some ideas that they can use for their own growth and their own practice in sharing what I know and what I do. So basically that's what I'm here for. And I know I'm not necessarily an author. I really even hesitate to call myself a content creator, even though I guess that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I've only been doing it for not even 2 months now, so I don't know. I'm just a witch, and I'm here to share what I know and just give my own perspective and hope that other people will gain some insight from it. So, green witchcraft is basically what I said in my little introductory video is my practice, my personal practice. I think the easiest way for me to start is just to kind of start with some of the current definitions that are out there and talk about whether that applies to me or not. And of course, the most easily found one is from Wikipedia, of course, which is pretty general information. So I'm going to actually read their definition and then kind of break it down point by point as to how I feel it applies or not. So the Wikipedia definition: a green witch is a witch whose practice focuses on nature using natural materials and energies. Green witches are often skilled herbalists and may enjoy gardening and wildcrafting as part of their practice. Green witches are often quite attuned to the cycles of nature and may or not practice astrology as a way to enhance this connection. A green witch is also dedicated to an environmentally friendly lifestyle. To a green witch, all natural places are sacred, and reducing her damaging human footprint on the earth is more than a lifestyle choice, but a sacred duty. A green witch often follows an earth-based spirituality, but may subscribe to any religion or none. Aside from the fact that they kind of gendered it into her, because not all witches are female, or identify as such, it's a pretty rock-solid, basic definition. So, let's dive into it from my own personal perspective. So, a practice that focuses on nature. Yes, but my perspective is that we are not separate from nature. I believe that wall, that division between man and nature is a falsity that probably came about more from some of the Christian mythology. The whole story of the Garden of Eden and the creation of man is, nature being created for us to cultivate and tame and all that. I don't really buy into that. So, my outlook is that we're just more advanced apes. We are a species who is a part of nature, and it just so happens that our adaptation to survival is to mold the things around us to better suit our needs. Now, knowing that, it also means that we have to recognize that we are changing the environment around us and try to find ways to do that while causing the least amount of harm to the other species that we share this world with. So that's basically my idea of what it means to focus on nature, is just recognizing that it's not a separate thing. We are interconnected with all of those other species around us, and we have an impact in all those other species that we share this planet with. And just trying to recognize where those connections are and how our actions impact that is basically a big part of my practice. So let me see. The next part is that, skilled herbalists. So I am not an herbalist. I have not taken any official courses in herbalism. I don't practice herbalism in what most people think of, which is using herbs as medicine. I have a lot of familiarity with the supposed medicinal properties of herbs. I say supposed because they're not actually supported by a lot of scientific evidence, simply because there hasn't been a lot of research into most of them. I do work in the healthcare field. As someone who works in the healthcare field, obviously I'm going to lean more towards the proven scientific method of medicine. That's not to say that herbs don't have a place in that, but I feel that it's better. I like complementary instead of alternative medicine. Let's just put it that way. A lot of the herbal remedies, a lot of the, folk remedies that we have, they're really, really good for symptom relief. But they're not going to cure things the way that, say, antibiotics will, If I have strep throat, I can take a tea that will definitely make my sore throat feel better. And it might help to reduce the bacterial load a little bit, but it's not going to cure it the way that antibiotics will. So yeah, I don't practice herbalism the way that most people define herbalism. Now, in Blue Star, we have one of our passive powers called herbology, which is all about the magical correspondence of herbs. That's more of where I lay my focus on, which is also kind of ties in with some of that symptom relief stuff as well. But yeah, herbalism as a medicinal practice is not something that I do, simply because that's, I have interests in other directions. So let me see. They may enjoy gardening and wildcrafting. Yes, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't be making this channel. Gardening is a huge part of my practice. Huge part of my practice. It's when I'm out in my garden that I feel the most like myself. I do have a lot of issues with anxiety. I hide it very well. For the most part, like, my anxiety is a team of wild horses that, through years of experience and just being out there and living life, I have learned how to harness them and channel that energy into more productive means. But that doesn't mean that they don't still sometimes run wild every once in a while and give me a panic attack. But when I'm out in my garden, I have no anxiety. None. And just to be able to have that calming of the spirit is really important to me. I can't really meditate because of my anxiety. Like, when I sit still, my thoughts start to race. And like, after about 5 minutes or so, like, my brain is already going off in 10 different directions. So sitting still and meditating does not work for me. But I've found that I can do moving meditation, where I set my body to a repetitive task, and then I can, with that energy being focused into what my hands are doing, my mind can then settle down and actually contemplate instead of race. So I do that a lot. Particularly weeding is a good task for that, because weeding for me is pretty mindless, just rip, 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 rip. And then while my hands are doing that, my mind can settle down and think about the things I need to think about. So yes, gardening is a huge part of my practice, and a big part of the way that I can calm down and get that wider perspective on things without obsessing over the minutiae that drive me crazy. Kind of gets me in touch with what's important. So yes, gardening is a huge part of my practice. Let me see. Attuned to the cycles of nature, yes. Obviously, what's going on out in my garden has a big impact on my life. Part of the reason I'm kind of feeling very blah today is because I was actually hoping to get outside and do something, even if it was going to be cold, but it was rainy and cold, and that's just not something I want to deal with. So, you know, the weather outside has an impact on me. The season that we're in has an impact on what I'm doing. So even just everyday things like the foods that I eat, I tend to eat different foods in the wintertime than I do in the summertime. During the summertime, I eat as much as I can from my garden, and that shapes what I'm making and preparing in the kitchen, whereas in the wintertime, I have to rely more on, I try to do more things that are in season, which is mostly things like mushrooms and root vegetables and grains and things of that nature, things that are readily available in the wintertime. So yeah, absolutely in tune with the cycles of nature. The practicing astrology part, that's a big no for me. Excuse me, I'm getting a little verklempt here. That's better. So, I think astrology is fun. I think it's sometimes a fun thing, like, you know, people talk about their birth, you know, their sun signs and their birth charts and all that kind of stuff. That's fun, but I don't put a whole lot of stock in it. I know that there is a whole system of gardening by astrology. Basically, there's astrological correspondences for all the plants, and certain plants are best to plant when the moon is in certain signs, and whether it's waxing and waning, and I just don't have time for that, you know. I work a full-time job. I don't work every day of the week, but I do work, and sometimes I'm working on the day that the full moon is in Scorpio and it's the best time to plant peas or whatever. I don't know. That's not the best time to plant peas. I'm talking out of my ass here, but I'm giving an example. but yeah, I don't have time. Like, I'm going to be out in my garden when I have time to be out in my garden. I'm not going to wait for the astrologically appropriate time to plant something. I'm going to plant something when I have the time to plant something. So, no, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to astrology. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting. I think it's useful knowledge to know, just to kind of give yourself a reference, because a lot of things tie in to astrology if you're doing a lot of witchy type things, but it's not something that I follow. So, yeah. Let me see. Being dedicated to an environmentally friendly lifestyle. This one's tough for me. So yeah, reducing damaging human footprint as a sacred duty. I try my best. I really do. And that's really all I can say. There are limitations. Here in home, I can do some small things to kind of help out. Just like most recently, we purchased some reusable cotton and bamboo fiber towels that we can use in the place of our paper towels, and just kind of cut down on our paper towel usage. The paper towels that I do use, I tend to compost them instead of putting them in the trash. So, you know, little steps like that. Out in my garden, I try to make my garden as friendly to the wildlife as possible. Very minimal use of pesticides. The pesticides that I do use tend to be things that are safe, like neem oil. But the problem is I also work in the healthcare industry, and that is an industry that is absolutely rife with waste, and it's unavoidable. You know, I mean, on an everyday basis when I'm at work, I can't even count the number of individually wrapped plastic disposable items that I go through. And that's simply necessary in order to prevent the spread of diseases, you know, and prolong people's health. I can't take a syringe and clean it and then reuse it on another patient. I'll make that other patient sick with whatever bacteria the first patient had. So it has to be a disposable plastic piece of trash that contributes to the landfill. And you know, it's awful. I can't help it, but it's awful. And I wish we had better alternatives, but we don't. So, yeah, you know, I recognize it's a problem. I try to be mindful, and I try to offset it when I can. I go out and do trash pickups at the local park and everything like that, but, you know, just, I have to recognize that, yeah, I'm a part of the problem too. And sometimes that's the best we can do, is just recognize that and do what we can to try and offset it as best we can. So, Well, that was a little disappointing, but it is what it is. So let's see. Let's talk about this last part here. The Green Witch follows an earth-based spirituality and may subscribe to any religion or none. I don't really like that term, earth-based spirituality, because it's an umbrella term that's so broad and vague that it may almost be meaningless. To me, what that says is basically someone who's not a part of a mainstream religion, and that can literally mean anything. So I guess that's sort of their, catch-all of just like, hey, if this applies to you, then maybe you can do this. And I don't know. I just don't feel like it's a very worthwhile thing to say, to be honest. I just don't even really know what that means. Earth-based spirituality. I mean, yeah, it's like, I guess someone who, pays attention to the earth in some way. But, I mean, isn't that basically what green witchcraft is? So what's the point in reiterating that? I don't know. So anyway, so how does this apply to me personally? What does my practice look like on the day-to-day? Obviously, it depends on what day it is. If it's a work day, I don't really do anything other than work, because I work usually about 12 to 13 hours a day on my work days. Don't fit in a lot of time for witchcraft practice on those days. But on the days that I'm here and I'm home, if I can, I try to get outside. Obviously, today was not a good day for that, but even just a few minutes outside sometimes. Sometimes even just after my work days, I'll come home and I'll just step outside onto my back porch and just kind of take a few breaths for 30 seconds before I come back in, just to kind of get my footing there. But when I can, I spend as much time as I can outside. Ideally tending to my garden, doing things there. I tend to just kind of go outside and just kind of do a little bit of reconnaissance, just looking around, seeing what needs my attention, what needs to be done, and then determining what I feel like doing on any given day based on that. It does give me a lot of personal satisfaction to be able to go out and get things done in my garden, and that's very fulfilling to me. I think being able to see the difference that you're making outside is a really big deal for me. I'm a big fan of checklists, and I get a lot of personal satisfaction from kind of like scratching off those tasks, so the garden really helps with that. Even when I don't really have, or if I've already done my tasks, if I don't have anything that really needs to be done at a time, I do like to just kind of sit outside and just spend time with my plants, soaking up the sun, watching the bees. It's very relaxing. Obviously, I tend to not do that for long periods of time. After 10 or 15 minutes, usually, then my mind starts to wander, and I usually start doing something, even if I intentionally set outside with the goal, like I'll bring out a book, and I'll intend to sit in my chair and read, and I'll do that for a few minutes, and then my mind will start to wander, and next thing I know, I'm weeding, but it happens, so. But it's still good for me to do that, even if it's not exactly what I planned on doing for that day. I do tend to use a lot of things from my garden, from my personal practice. So this tea that I'm drinking right now, this is to kind of help cheer me up a little bit on this blah day. It is equal parts catnip, lemon balm, and spearmint, all three of which I've grown in my garden, and all three of which are kind of soothing plants, good for mood without making you sleepy. So there's that. I've also made a lot of actual physical, tangible things for my practice, that either for myself or that I've given to friends. Numerous wands from the plants in my backyard and plants that I've wildcrafted, branches that I've just found laying about most commonly. I made my broom that I use. We do actually use a broom in Blue Star, the besom. Mine is actually made from broom corn that I grew in my own garden, and an oak branch that I cut off of my oak tree, which sadly is no longer with me, but I still have that to remember it by. So that's like a physical, tangible thing that I made from my garden. My ritual blade is not something that I actually made myself, but it's It's my old garden knife, or hori hori, as it's called in Japanese. It's the Japanese garden knife. It's a pretty sizable blade, usually serrated on one side and then a sharp edge on the other. My old one got very dull, and the handle was starting to get a little wonky, and it just I upgraded to a newer one that was a little bit sharper and a little bit lighter, but I still love my old one, and I converted it into my ritual blade. So that is something that definitely I incorporated from my green witchcraft into my Wiccan practice, which is kind of fun. And then, of course, just the consumable items, the tisanes or teas, the incense. I'm currently in the process of making some black walnut ink. I've made dyes, yarn dyes that I've dyed yarn with. Things of that nature. Just all those little fun little crafts from my garden. So, but yeah, long story short is that, I don't feel like when you're practicing witchcraft, I don't feel like there has to be this big, super powerful channeling of, this huge spiritual revelation that is visited upon you or anything like that. My practice is really just more down to earth, just finding the space to really be comfortable with myself and who I am, and being happy with what I have around me is a big part of just what I like to do and what I think about when I'm outside. And just kind of, finding that space for myself. So that's basically what I do, And I know that's kind of generic and broad too, but it's something that's really hard to convey because it's more feelings than actions. So, yeah. I would love to hear from you guys if you have anything that you feel is really important to you that you've gotten in touch with when you're outside. Or I don't know, just anything that you feel like sharing. I'm always happy to hear from people. So I hope that this finds you well, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.